The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the compound walls as Lieutenant Sarah Chun pressed her back against the concrete barrier. Her medical kit felt heavier than usual as explosions echoed in the distance. The radio crackled with urgent voices calling for medical assistance from multiple locations across the base. Sarah had been serving as a Navy medic for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for the intensity of this deployment. The forward operating base in Afghanistan had become a target for increased insurgent activity over the past month. What started as routine patrols had escalated into daily firefights and casualty evacuations. "Doc Chun, we need you at the North Gate immediately," came the urgent voice of Sergeant Rodriguez through her radio. "We've got wounded coming in hot." Sarah grabbed her gear and sprinted across the compound, dodging between concrete barriers and sandbags. The sound of incoming helicopters grew louder as she approached the landing zone. 3 Black Hawks were descending through the dust clouds, their rotors creating a whirlwind of sand and debris. As the first helicopter touched down, the side doors slid open, revealing the grim scene inside. 2 Navy SEALs were carrying a third between them, blood soaking through his tactical vest. Behind them, another SEAL limped toward the exit, clutching his shoulder where crimson stains spread across his uniform. "What's the situation?" Sarah called out as she rushed toward the casualties. Petty Officer Marcus Williams, the team's lead medic, jogged alongside the wounded SEAL being carried. IED blast during reconnaissance. Thompson took shrapnel to the chest and abdomen. Rodriguez has a dislocated shoulder and possible concussion. Sarah immediately began her assessment as they moved the first casualty toward the medical tent. Thompson was conscious but pale, his breathing shallow and rapid. Blood loss was significant, and she could see metal fragments protruding from his tactical vest. "Get him on the table," she instructed, her training taking over despite the chaos around them. "I need 4 access now." As Sarah worked to stabilize Thompson, she noticed something unusual about the team dynamics. The SEALs who had carried him and remained close by, their faces showing more concern than she typically observed. These were hardened warriors who had seen countless battles, yet there was something different about their demeanor. Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison stood near the entrance of the medical tent, his usually stern expression softened with worry. He was known throughout the base as one of the toughest SEALs in the unit, a man who never showed weakness or vulnerability. Yet as Sarah worked on his teammate, she could see his hands trembling slightly. "How bad is it, Doc?" Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's stable for now," Sarah replied while inserting in 4-line. "But I need to get these fragments out and stop the internal bleeding. This is going to take time." The second wounded SEAL, Rodriguez, sat on a nearby cot holding an ice pack to his head. Despite his own injuries, his attention remained focused on his teammate. Sarah noticed that none of the SEALs had left the medical area, which was unusual. Typically, once casualties were delivered, the uninjured team members would report for debriefing. As Sarah continued working on Thompson, she became aware of hushed conversations taking place around the tent. The SEALs were speaking in low tones, occasionally glancing in her direction. Their behavior struck her as odd, but she remained focused on her patient's critical condition. "Doc, his blood pressure is dropping," called out Hospital Corpsman Second Class David Park, who was monitoring Thompson's vital signs. Sarah increased the 4 fluids and began preparing blood products for transfusion. The shrapnel had caused more damage than initially apparent, and she realized this case was beyond the capabilities of the forward operating base's medical facilities. "We need to get him to the combat support hospital," she announced. "He needs emergency surgery that we can't perform here." Morrison stepped forward immediately. "What do you need from us?" "Help me prepare him for transport. The medevac bird will be here in 15 minutes. As the team worked together to stabilize Thompson for evacuation, Sarah noticed the extraordinary care and attention the SEALs showed toward their wounded teammate. She had treated many military personnel during her deployment, but the bond between these men seemed deeper than typical unit camaraderie. While waiting for the medevac helicopter, Sarah took the opportunity to examine Rodriguez's injuries more thoroughly. His shoulder was indeed dislocated, and he showed signs of a mild concussion from the blast. As she worked to reduce the dislocation, she engaged him in conversation to assess his cognitive function. "How are you feeling, Rodriguez? Any nausea or dizziness?" "I'm okay, Doc," he replied, though she could see he was fighting back pain. "Just worried about Thompson. He's got a wife and 2 kids back home." This comment sparked something in Sarah's memory. She had heard similar conversations before, but there was something more personal in the way these SEALs spoke about each other's families. It was as if they were discussing their own relatives rather than just teammates. The sound of approaching rotors announced the arrival of the medevac helicopter. Sarah and the SEALs quickly moved Thompson onto the stretcher and prepared for transport. As they loaded him into the aircraft, Morrison grabbed Sarah's arm gently. "Take care of him, document. He's important to a lot of people." There was something in Morrison's eyes that Sarah couldn't quite identify. It wasn't just the concern of a commanding officer for his subordinate. There was a deeper, more personal pain reflected there, as if Thompson's injuries had wounded Morrison himself. After the medevac departed, Sarah found herself alone with the remaining members of the SEAL team. They had gathered in a circle near the landing zone, their heads bowed in what appeared to be a moment of silent prayer or reflection. She had never witnessed such a display of vulnerability from these elite warriors. Rodriguez approached her as she was cleaning up her medical equipment. Despite his own injuries, he seemed more concerned about her well-being than his own. "Doc, I want to thank you for what you did back there. Thompson owes his life to your quick thinking." "That's my job," Sarah replied, though she was touched by his gratitude. "No, it's more than that," Rodriguez continued. "You treated him like he was family. That means everything to us." As the day progressed, Sarah found herself thinking about the unusual dynamics she had observed among the SEAL team. Their concern for Thompson went beyond professional obligation, and their gratitude toward her felt deeply personal. She had saved many lives during her deployment, but never had she received such heartfelt appreciation. That evening, as Sarah was updating Thompson's medical records, Chief Morrison approached her quarters. He knocked softly on her door, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Doc Shun, do you have a minute?" "Of course, Chief. How can I help you?" Morrison hesitated for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to talk to you about Thompson, about what happened today." Sarah invited him inside and offered him a seat. She could see that whatever Morrison wanted to discuss was weighing heavily on him. "The way you handled the situation today," Morrison began, "it reminded me of someone very important to our team." "What do you mean?" Morrison looked out the small window toward the landing zone where Thompson had been evacuated. "We lost someone a few months ago, someone who meant a lot to all of us. When I watched you work on Thompson today, it brought back memories." Sarah sensed there was more to this story, but she didn't want to push Morrison to share more than he was comfortable with. She had learned that military personnel often carried burdens that were difficult to discuss. "I'm glad I could help," she said simply. "Doc, can I ask you something personal?" Sarah nodded, curious about where this conversation was heading. "Do you have any family in military? Anyone serving overseas?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "No, not currently." "Why do you ask?" Morrison studied her face carefully, as if searching for something specific. "Just wondering. Sometimes people remind you of others, you know?" As Morrison prepared to leave, he turned back towards Sarah one more time. "Doc, if you ever need anything at all, you let me or any of my men know. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." After Morrison left, Sarah sat in her quarters, trying to process the strange conversation. There was clearly something the SEAL team wasn't telling her, something connected to the person Morrison had mentioned losing. The way he had looked at her, studied her face, suggested there might be more to their gratitude than just professional appreciation. Late that night, Sarah received word that Thompson had successfully undergone surgery and was expected to make a full recovery. She felt a wave of relief wash over her, knowing that her quick actions had made the difference between life and death. As she prepared for bed, Sarah's radio crackled with an incoming message. It was Morrison's voice, barely audible through the static. Doc Chun, Thompson's surgery went well. The whole team wants to thank you again. You saved one of our own today, and we won't forget it. There was something in Morrison's tone that suggested deeper meaning behind his words. The phrase, one of our own, seemed to carry weight beyond its literal interpretation. Sarah found herself wondering about the connection between her actions today and the team member Morrison had mentioned losing. Sleep came slowly for Sarah that night. Her mind replayed the events of the day, particularly the unusual behavior of the SEAL team and Morrison's cryptic comments. She had the distinct feeling that there was more to this story, something that the SEALs were keeping from her. As dawn approached, Sarah made a decision. She would try to learn more about the team member who had been lost, the person Morrison claimed she reminded him of. Perhaps understanding that connection would help her make sense of the extraordinary gratitude the SEALs had shown her. The morning brought new challenges as the base prepared for increased enemy activity. Intelligence reports suggested that insurgent forces were planning coordinated attacks against multiple coalition positions. Sarah checked her medical supplies and prepared for what could be a long and difficult day. As she made her rounds through the compound, Sarah noticed that several SEALs nodded respectfully in her direction. Word of Thompson's successful treatment had apparently spread throughout the unit, earning her recognition from the elite warriors. Rodriguez approached her near the mess hall, his arm in a sling, but otherwise looking much better than the previous day. Doc, I wanted you to know that Thompson called from the hospital this morning. He's doing great, and he specifically asked me to thank you again. I'm glad he's recovering well, Sarah replied. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to you. Listen, Doc, the team is having a small gathering tonight to celebrate Thompson's recovery. We'd like you to join us. Sarah was surprised by the invitation. Military units rarely included medical personnel in their informal gatherings unless there were special circumstances. That's very kind of you, but I don't want to intrude on your team time. Rodriguez shook his head firmly. Doc, you're not intruding. After what you did yesterday, you're family. Besides, Chief Morrison specifically requested that you be there. The word family struck Sarah as significant. These elite warriors didn't use such terms lightly, and she was beginning to understand that her actions had created a bond that went beyond professional courtesy. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself looking forward to the evening gathering. Perhaps it would provide an opportunity to learn more about the team dynamics and the mysterious connection Morrison had mentioned. The base remained on high alert throughout the day, but no attacks materialized. Sarah used the relative calm to catch up on administrative duties and restock her medical supplies. She also took time to research SEAL team casualties from recent months, hoping to find information about the team member Morrison had referenced. Her search through medical records and casualty reports revealed several losses for various SEAL units, but nothing that seemed directly connected to Morrison's team. The information was often classified or redacted, making it difficult to piece together a complete picture. As evening approached, Rodriguez appeared at Sarah's quarters to escort her to the team gathering. They walked across the compound toward a small recreational area where several SEALs had assembled around a makeshift fire pit. The atmosphere was more relaxed than Sarah had expected. The warriors who had seemed so intense and focused during the medical emergency now appeared almost like a group of friends enjoying each other's company. However, she noticed that there was an empty chair positioned prominently near the fire, as if someone important was missing. Chief Morrison stood as Sarah approached, his expression warm but still carrying that hint of sadness she had noticed before. Doc Chun, thank you for joining us. Please have a seat. As the evening progressed, Sarah listened to stories about various missions and deployments. The SEALs spoke with obvious affection about their shared experiences, but she noticed that certain topics seemed to be avoided. There were moments when conversations would start to head in particular directions before being gently redirected. The empty chair remained a silent presence throughout the gathering, and Sarah began to suspect it held special significance for the team. Finally, her curiosity got the better of her. Chief Morrison, I couldn't help but notice the empty chair. Is someone joining us later? The group fell silent, and Morrison's expression grew somber. He looked around at his teammates, as if seeking permission to share something important. "Doc, that chair belongs to someone who can't be with us anymore. Someone who was very important to our team and our mission." Sarah sensed that she was about to learn the truth behind the team's unusual behavior and Morrison's cryptic comments from the previous evening. "Would you mind if I asked what happened?" Morrison took a deep breath, clearly struggling with emotion. Her name was Lieutenant Emily Thompson. She was our team medic, and she was killed in action 3 months ago. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The intensity of the team's gratitude, Morrison's comments about her reminding him of someone important, and the extraordinary care they had shown during the medical emergency suddenly made perfect sense. "She was family to us," Rodriguez added quietly. "The best medic we ever served with, and one of the finest people any of us had ever known." As the fire crackled in the silence that followed, Sarah began to understand the true significance of what had transpired the previous day. In saving Thompson's life, she had unknowingly stepped into the role of their fallen teammate, providing the medical expertise and care that Emily Thompson would have given. The weight of this realization was overwhelming, and Sarah felt honored yet humbled by the comparison to someone who had clearly meant so much to these brave men. The silence around the fire pit stretched on as Sarah absorbed the gravity of what Chief Morrison had revealed. Lieutenant Emily Thompson had been more than just a medic to this SEAL team. She had been their lifeline, their guardian angel, and, most importantly, their family. The empty chair beside the fire wasn't just a memorial. It was a sacred space that honored her memory and her sacrifice. "Tell me about her," Sarah said softly, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. Morrison's weathered face softened as he leaned back in his chair. His eyes reflected the firelight as memories seemed to flood back. "Emily joined our team 18 months ago, fresh out of advanced medical training. We were skeptical at first, not because she was a woman, but because she looked like she could barely carry her own medical kit, let alone keep up with a SEAL team." Rodriguez chuckled despite the somber mood. "Chief, you remember what she said during her first briefing?" "How could I forget?" Morrison replied with a sad smile. She stood up in front of 12 of the most intimidating warriors in the Navy and said, "Gentlemen, I may be small, but I can patch you up faster than you can break yourselves." Then, she proceeded to demonstrate emergency medical procedures with a confidence that left us all speechless. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson, a quiet man who served as the team's explosives expert, spoke up for the first time that evening. "She proved herself within the first week. We were on patrol when Henderson stepped on an IED. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran straight into the kill zone to treat him while bullets were still flying." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she imagined the scene. She knew the courage it took to provide medical care under fire, but to do so during your first week with an elite unit required exceptional bravery. "That's when we knew she belonged," Morrison continued. "Emily wasn't just skilled, she was fearless. But more than that, she genuinely cared about each of us. She learned our personal histories, our families' names, our fears and hopes. She became the heart of our team." As the SEALs shared memories of Emily, Sarah began to understand the depth of loss they had experienced. Emily hadn't just been their medic. She had been their confidant, their moral compass, and their connection to the humanity they sometimes had to suppress in the line of duty. "She had this way of making everyone feel heard," added Petty Officer Second Class Danny Rivera, the team's communications specialist. "Didn't matter if you were the lowest-ranking guy or the chief himself. When you talked to Emily, she gave you her complete attention, made you feel like your problems mattered." Sarah noticed that as each man shared his memories, others nodded in recognition, their faces showing both grief and gratitude. It was clear that Emily's impact on the team extended far beyond her medical expertise. "What happened to her?" Sarah asked gently, though she wasn't sure she was prepared for the answer. Morrison's expression grew darker, and several team members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chief looked around the circle, gauging whether his men were ready to revisit that painful day. We were conducting a humanitarian mission in a village about 50 clicks from here. Morrison began slowly. Intel had reported that insurgents were preventing medical supplies from reaching civilian families. Our job was to provide security while Emily and a local medical team set up a temporary clinic. The fire popped loudly, causing everyone to start slightly. The sound seemed to emphasize the tension that had settled over the group as Morrison prepared to continue his account. The mission was going smoothly. Emily had treated dozens of villagers, children with infections, elderly people with chronic conditions, mothers with newborns. She was in her element, using her medical skills to help people who had nowhere else to turn. Rodriguez took over the narrative, his voice thick with emotion. That's when the mortar rounds started falling. The insurgents had been watching the clinic, waiting for the right moment to attack. They wanted to send a message that anyone who cooperated with coalition forces would pay the price. Sarah could see the pain in Rodriguez's eyes as he relived the memory. His hands trembled slightly as he continued speaking. Emily was in the middle of treating a pregnant woman when the first explosion hit. Instead of seeking cover like any rational person would do, she stayed with her patient. The woman was having complications, and Emily knew that leaving her would mean certain death for both mother and child. Johnson picked up the story, his voice barely above a whisper. We tried to establish a secure perimeter, but the enemy had us surrounded. We could see Emily through the clinic window, still working on the woman while explosions went off all around the building. She never looked up, never stopped what she was doing. The second mortar hit closer. Morrison continued, his voice growing strained. Part of the clinic wall collapsed, but Emily kept working. We could hear her talking to the woman, keeping her calm while she performed an emergency cesarean section under impossible conditions. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she imagined the scene. She knew the skill and courage required to perform surgery under normal circumstances, let alone during an active combat situation with limited equipment and constant threat of death. She saved them, Rivera said quietly. Both mother and baby survived because Emily refused to abandon them. But the third mortar, the sentence hung unfinished in the air. Sarah didn't need to hear the rest to understand what had happened. Emily Thompson had given her life to save others, embodying the highest ideals of military medicine and human compassion. The building collapsed. Morrison finished. By the time we cleared the rubble and got to her, she was gone. But the woman and her baby were alive, protected by Emily's body during the final explosion. The silence that followed was profound and sacred. Sarah understood now why the SEALs had reacted so strongly to her treatment of Thompson the previous day. In their eyes, she had channeled Emily's spirit, providing the same level of care and dedication that their fallen teammate had demonstrated. "Chief," Sarah said after several minutes, "I'm honored that you would compare me to someone so extraordinary. I hope I can live up to her example." Morrison looked at her with an intensity that made Sarah feel as if he was seeing straight into her soul. "Doc, what you did yesterday wasn't just good medicine. It was what Emily would have done. The way you focused completely on Thompson, the way you refused to give up even when things looked hopeless, the way you treated him like he was your own family member. It was like having Emily back with us for those critical moments." As the evening progressed, the SEALs shared more stories about Emily's time with the team. They talked about her sense of humor, her ability to defuse tension with a well-timed joke, and her uncanny knack for knowing exactly what each team member needed to hear when they were struggling. She used to carry these little chocolate bars in her medical kit, Johnson recalled with a smile. Said they were for shock patients, but she'd hand them out whenever someone was having a bad day. "I probably ate 50 of those chocolate bars during my divorce proceedings last year." Remember the time she convinced the base commander to let her set up a movie night for the wounded soldiers in the hospital? Rodriguez added. She said laughter was better medicine than half the drugs in her kit. Sarah found herself wishing she had known Emily Thompson personally. The woman who emerged from these stories was someone she would have admired and aspired to emulate, a skilled professional who never lost sight of the human element in her work. "Doc Chun," Morrison said as the fire began to die down. "I need to tell you something else. Something that might help you understand why yesterday was so important to all of us." Sarah leaned forward, sensing that Morrison was about to share something particularly significant. Emily had a younger sister, a sister who was also in the Navy, serving as a medic. They looked similar, same dark hair, same focused expression when they worked, same gentle way of treating patients that made everyone feel safe. Sarah's heart began to race as she sensed where this conversation was heading. Emily's sister was supposed to join our team after completing her specialized training. Emily talked about her constantly, showed us pictures, told us stories about growing up together. She was so proud of her little sister and couldn't wait for us to meet her. Morrison paused, studying Sarah's face carefully. Emily's sister was supposed to report to our unit next month. Her name was supposed to be on the manifest for the next personnel rotation. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting, though she remained perfectly still in her chair. "Chief," she said slowly, "what was Emily's sister's name?" Morrison's eyes never left her face as he answered. According to the personnel records Emily showed us, her sister's name was Sarah Chun. The revelation hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. She felt her medical training take over as her mind automatically began processing the implications of what Morrison had just revealed. Her heart rate increased, her breathing became shallow, and she experienced a moment of disorientation that threatened to overwhelm her. "That's impossible," she whispered, though even as she spoke, fragments of memory began surfacing in her mind. Conversations with her parents about a cousin who had joined the military. Family gatherings where certain relatives were mentioned, but never present. Photos that seemed to be missing from family albums. Rodriguez moved closer to Sarah, his medic training recognizing the signs of shock. "Doc, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the information Morrison had shared. She had always known that some of her extended family had served in the military, but her parents had been vague about the details. They had mentioned a cousin who was doing important work overseas, but had never provided specifics. "Chief," Sarah said, her voice stronger now as her training reasserted itself, "I need to see those personnel records you mentioned. I need to see the photos Emily showed you." Morrison nodded gravely. "I thought you might. I have them back in my quarters, along with some personal effects that were recovered from the clinic." Emily had asked us to hold on to some things for her sister's arrival. As the group prepared to disperse for the evening, Sarah felt as if she were moving through a dream. The possibility that Emily Thompson had been her cousin, a cousin she had apparently never met but who had been expecting to serve alongside her, seemed both impossible and inevitable. "Doc," Johnson said as they walked back toward the main compound, "I want you to know that regardless of what those records show, you've already proven yourself to this team. What happened yesterday stands on its own merits." Sarah appreciated his words, but her mind was consumed with questions about her family history and the connections that had brought her to this moment. If Emily really had been her cousin, it would explain so much about the SEAL's reaction to her medical skills and personal demeanor. As they reached Morrison's quarters, Sarah noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. The chief invited her inside while he retrieved a box from his footlocker. The container was marked with Emily's name and contained official documents as well as personal items. Morrison opened the box carefully and withdrew a manila folder containing personnel records and photographs. He handed the folder to Sarah with an expression of deep solemnity. "These are copies of the documents Emily showed us." She was so excited about serving with family that she couldn't stop talking about her cousin who was following in her footsteps. Sarah opened the folder with trembling fingers. The first document was a personnel file with her own name, service record, and photograph. Seeing her official Navy photo among Emily's personal effects was surreal and unsettling. The second photograph was more personal, a family gathering that Sarah recognized from her childhood. She remembered the event clearly, a barbecue at her grandparents' house when she was about 12 years old. What she didn't remember was the young woman standing next to her in the photo, both of them wearing matching summer dresses. That's Emily on the right, Morrison said quietly. She told us this picture was taken at a family reunion about 10 years ago. She said it was one of the few times she and her cousin had been together, but she treasured the memory. Sarah stared at the photograph, desperately trying to recall the occasion and the girl who stood beside her. Gradually, fragments of memory began to surface. Conversations about a cousin who lived across the country, plans for visits that never materialized, and a growing distance between branches of the family that had left gaps in her knowledge of relatives. I remember this day, Sarah said slowly, but I don't remember Emily specifically. There were so many relatives at that gathering, and I was just a kid. Morrison nodded understandingly. Emily said your families had drifted apart over the years. Different states, different lives. She was hoping that serving together would give you both a chance to reconnect and build the relationship you'd missed as children. As Sarah continued examining the documents, she found letters that Emily had written but never sent. Letters addressed to cousin Sarah, describing her experiences with the SEAL team and her excitement about their upcoming reunion. The letters painted a picture of a young woman who had felt isolated by her dangerous profession, but had found hope in the prospect of serving with family. The final item in the folder was a small jewelry box containing a silver locket. Morrison opened it to reveal two photographs, one of Emily in her naval uniform and another that appeared to be a childhood photo of Sarah. She wore this every day, Morrison explained. Said it reminded her that she wasn't alone in the world, that family was waiting for her somewhere. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the weight of this discovery. Emily Thompson hadn't just been an exemplary medic and beloved team member. She had been family, a cousin who had carried Sarah's photograph over her heart while serving in some of the world's most dangerous locations. "Chief," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "I need time to process this. Can I keep these documents overnight?" Morrison nodded. "Of course. And Doc, I want you to know that Emily would be proud of what you did yesterday. You honored her memory in the best possible way." As Sarah walked back to her quarters, her mind struggled to absorb the magnitude of what she had learned. The cousin she barely remembered had become a hero, a woman whose sacrifice had saved lives, and whose memory was cherished by some of the military's most elite warriors. The discovery also explained the inexplicable sense of familiarity she had felt when working with the SEAL team. Despite never having served with them before, she had instinctively understood their dynamics and responded to their needs in a way that went beyond professional competence. Back in her quarters, Sarah spread Emily's letters across her desk and began reading them carefully. Through Emily's words, she glimpsed a life dedicated to service and sacrifice, but also one marked by loneliness and a longing for family connection. In one letter, Emily wrote, "I think about our cousin Sarah often. Mom always said we were alike, both stubborn, both determined to help others no matter the cost. I wonder if she remembers that summer when we tried to build a hospital for injured birds in Grandma's backyard. Even then, we both knew we wanted to be healers." The memory came flooding back. Two girls constructing elaborate medical facilities for wounded animals, playing doctor with the same intensity that would later drive them both toward careers in military medicine. Sarah remembered Emily now, remembered the serious little girl who had shared her passion for helping others. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself writing a letter of her own, a response to the cousin who would never read it, an acknowledgement of the family bond that had connected them across time and distance even when they were unaware of each other's presence. "Dear Emily," she wrote, "I remember you now. I remember your kindness, your determination, and your dream of saving lives. I promise to honor your memory and continue the work you started. Your SEAL family has become my family too, and I will protect them the way you did." The weight of this new responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders as she prepared for bed. She was no longer just a medic assigned to provide medical support. She was now the keeper of Emily Thompson's legacy, the living connection between a fallen hero and the warriors who had loved her. The morning sun cast long shadows across the base as Sarah stood at Emily's memorial, a a small metal cross planted near the medical facility with her cousin's name etched into the metal. She had woken before dawn, unable to sleep after the revelations of the previous evening. The weight of Emily's story, their family connection, and the responsibility she now felt toward the SEAL team pressed heavily on her mind. Sarah placed a small bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered from the perimeter of the base at the base of the cross. The flowers were simple, hardy desert blooms that managed to survive in the harsh environment, much like Emily had done during her time here. "I wish I had known you better," Sarah whispered to the memorial. "I wish we had stayed in touch. But I promise you, I'll take care of your boys." The sound of approaching footsteps caused Sarah to turn. Chief Morrison walked toward her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that was part concern, part understanding. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Rough night." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "I kept thinking about Emily, about our childhood, about all the years we lost. It's strange how you could be connected to someone without really knowing them." Morrison nodded as he stood beside her, both of them facing Emily's memorial. "She talked about you a lot, especially toward the end. I think she felt the same way, connected but distant. She was hoping that serving together would change that." "Chief, I need to ask you something," Sarah said, turning to face him directly. "The way the team has welcomed me, the trust you've shown, is that because of who I am, or because of who Emily was?" It was a question that had kept Sarah awake most of the night. While she was honored to be connected to Emily's memory, she needed to know that she was valued for her own skills and character, not just as a replacement for their fallen teammate. Morrison considered the question carefully before responding. While Emily's legacy would always be part of her story now, she needed to know that she was building her own relationship with these warriors based on mutual respect and shared commitment to their mission. That being said, Morrison continued with a slight smile, "There are some uncanny similarities. Emily had the same way of tilting her head when she was concentrating on a medical procedure, the same habit of talking to unconscious patients while she worked on them, even some of the same expressions." Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself settling into a routine that honored Emily's memory while establishing her own identity within the team. The SEALs gradually began sharing more personal stories about Emily, helping Sarah understand not just who her cousin had been as a medic, but who she had been as a person. She learned that Emily had been an accomplished pianist who often played for wounded soldiers during her off-duty hours. The base commander had even allowed her to have a small keyboard in the medical facility, and she would play soft melodies while treating patients who were recovering from minor injuries. "Music helped people heal," Rodriguez explained one afternoon as they reorganized medical supplies. Emily believed that addressing the emotional and spiritual aspects of healing was just as important as treating physical wounds. Sarah made a mental note to request a keyboard for the medical facility. While she wasn't as accomplished a musician as Emily had been, she had learned piano as a child and thought she might be able to continue this tradition in her cousin's honor. She also discovered that Emily had been working on a comprehensive manual of battlefield medicine techniques, specifically designed to help medics in forward operating bases deal with complex trauma cases. The manual was nearly complete when Emily died, but had been set aside in the aftermath of her loss. "Would it be possible for me to review Emily's medical manual?" Sarah asked Morrison during one of their regular briefings. "I'd like to see if there's a way to complete her work." Morrison's face lit up with interest. "I think she would love that. Her research could save countless lives if it gets published properly. The medical innovations she developed here were years ahead of what they're teaching in medical schools." That evening, Morrison brought Sarah a thick folder containing Emily's medical research. As Sarah reviewed the documents, she was amazed by the sophistication of her cousin's work. Emily had developed new techniques for treating complex trauma in resource-limited environments, innovations that could revolutionize military medicine. The manual was organized into sections covering everything from improvised surgical techniques to psychological support for wounded warriors. Emily's writing was clear, detailed, and filled with compassionate insights about treating the whole person, not just their injuries. One section particularly caught Sarah's attention: the medic as family, creating bonds that heal. In this chapter, Emily had written extensively about the importance of medics becoming integral parts of their units, providing not just medical care, but emotional support and continuity for warriors facing repeated trauma. The medic serves as the conscience of the unit, Emily had written. We remind warriors that they are human beings worthy of care and compassion, not just weapons to be deployed. Our role extends beyond treating wounds to healing souls. Sarah spent hours each evening working on completing Emily's manual, consulting with the SEAL team members to verify techniques and gather additional insights. The project became a labor of love, a way of preserving Emily's legacy while contributing to the broader medical community. As word of the manual spread throughout the base, other medical personnel began approaching Sarah with their own contributions and suggestions. What had started as a personal project to honor Emily's memory was evolving into a comprehensive resource that could benefit military medics worldwide. 3 weeks after the night around the fire pit, Sarah received news that would test everything she had learned about herself and her connection to Emily's legacy. Intelligence reports indicated that insurgent forces were planning a major attack on a nearby village where coalition forces had been providing humanitarian aid. It's the same village where Emily died, Morrison informed Sarah during the mission briefing. Intel suggests they're trying to finish what they started, send a message that anyone who accepts help from coalition forces will pay the price. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized the significance of this mission. She would be returning to the place where Emily had made her final sacrifice, possibly facing the same enemies who had killed her cousin. I want to volunteer for this mission, Sarah said without hesitation. Morrison studied her face carefully. Doc, you don't need to prove anything. We know you're committed to the team. This isn't about proving myself, Sarah replied. It's about finishing what Emily started. She died protecting those villagers. If they're in danger again, I need to be there. The mission briefing revealed a complex situation. Insurgents had surrounded the village and were preventing medical supplies from reaching the residents, many of whom were suffering from preventable diseases. The SEAL team would provide security while Sarah and a small medical team established a temporary clinic, exactly the same scenario that had led to Emily's death. As Sarah prepared her medical equipment for the mission, she found herself thinking about Emily's final moments. Her cousin had chosen to stay with her patients, even when it meant certain death. Now, Sarah was being asked to walk into a similar situation, knowing the risks but understanding the necessity. Rodriguez approached her as she loaded supplies into her medical kit. Doc, I want you to know that this mission is voluntary for all of us. Nobody would think less of you if you decided not to go. Sarah looked up from her packing. Rodriguez, Emily died in that village, trying to save people who had nowhere else to turn. Those same people are in danger again. How can I not go? The conviction in her voice surprised even Sarah herself. She realized that somewhere in the process of learning about Emily's life and sacrifice, she had internalized her cousin's values and commitment to serving others regardless of personal risk. That night, Sarah wrote another letter to Emily, this one to be left behind in case she didn't return from the mission. Dear Emily, she wrote, tomorrow I'm going back to the place where you made your final stand. I'm scared, but I'm also proud to follow in your footsteps. If something happens to me, I want you to know that getting to know you through your friends and your work has been one of the greatest honors of my life. You didn't just save lives with your medical skills. You saved souls with your compassion. I hope I can live up to the example you set. The morning of the mission dawned clear and hot. Sarah stood with the SEAL team at the landing zone, watching as helicopters prepared for departure. Each warrior conducted final equipment checks with a methodical precision that came from years of training, but Sarah could sense the emotional weight this mission carried for all of them. Morrison approached her one final time before boarding. Doc, I need you to promise me something. If the situation goes bad, if we tell you to leave your patients and seek cover, you do it immediately. We can't lose another medic, especially not Emily's family. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Chief, I promise you that I'll be smart about risks. But I also need you to understand that some things are more important than personal safety. Emily knew that, and so do I. As the helicopters lifted off, Sarah found herself sitting across from Johnson, who was carrying a small bag of personal effects that had belonged to Emily. Before each mission, one of the team members would carry something of Emily's as a way of keeping her memory with them. "What did you bring today?" Sarah asked. Johnson opened the bag to reveal Emily's stethoscope, the one she had been using when the clinic was attacked. It was dented and scarred from the explosion, but it had been carefully preserved as a reminder of her dedication. Emily always said that a stethoscope was a medic's most important tool, Johnson explained. Not because it was the most advanced technology, but because it required you to get close to your patients, to listen to their hearts, to connect with them as human beings. Sarah accepted the stethoscope reverently. Holding the instrument that Emily had used to save countless lives created a tangible connection between past and present, between the medic who had died and the one who was carrying on her mission. As their helicopter approached the village, Sarah could see smoke rising from several buildings. The insurgents had already begun their campaign of intimidation, burning structures, and threatening civilians who had previously accepted coalition aid. 2 minutes out, the pilot announced over the aircraft communication system. Sarah checked her medical equipment one final time, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She thought about Emily's final moments, about the choice her cousin had made to stay with her patients even when death was certain. The helicopter touched down in a field outside the village, and immediately Sarah could hear the distant sound of gunfire. The insurgents were engaged in a firefight with local security forces, creating chaos and confusion that would complicate the medical mission. As the SEAL team established a secure perimeter, Sarah and her medical assistant began setting up a treatment area in the same building where Emily had died. The structure had been partially rebuilt since the attack, but scorch marks on the walls served as stark reminders of what had transpired there. "Doc, we've got wounded civilians coming in," Rodriguez called out over the radio. "Multiple casualties from the fighting in the village center." Sarah activated her medical protocols, transforming from a reflective person remembering her cousin into a focused medical professional ready to save lives. Emily's stethoscope hung around her neck, a tangible reminder of the standards she needed to meet. The first casualties arrived within minutes, an elderly man with shrapnel wounds and a young mother carrying an injured child. Sarah immediately began triaging patients, determining who needed immediate care and who could wait. It was exactly the kind of situation Emily had faced during her final mission. As Sarah worked on the injured civilians, she became aware of mortar rounds exploding in the distance. The insurgents were using the same tactics they had employed against Emily's clinic, gradually increasing the intensity of their attack to force the medical team to abandon their patients. "Doc, we need to consider evacuation," Morrison's voice crackled over her radio. "The enemy is massing for a major assault." Sarah looked around the treatment area at the wounded villagers who depended on her care. A pregnant woman was in active labor, complicated by injuries from the fighting. An elderly man had internal bleeding that required immediate surgery. A child with severe burns needed constant monitoring to prevent shock. These are the same kinds of patients Emily had been treating when she made her final decision to stay. Sarah understood now the impossible choice her cousin had faced: abandon patients who would certainly die, or stay and risk her own life to save theirs. "Chief," Sarah responded into her radio, "I need more time. These patients will die if we evacuate now." "Doc, that's exactly what Emily said 3 months ago." Sarah felt the weight of history pressing down on her as she continued working on her patients. She was standing at the exact crossroads where Emily had made her heroic choice, facing the same moral dilemma that had defined her cousin's final moments. The sound of approaching mortars grew louder, and Sarah knew that she would soon have to make the same choice that had cost Emily her life. But, unlike her cousin, Sarah wouldn't be making that decision alone. She had the support of a SEAL team that understood the value of her mission and would do everything possible to protect both her and her patients. As explosions began falling closer to the clinic, Sarah realized that the next few hours would determine whether Emily's sacrifice had been in vain or whether her cousin's legacy of compassion and courage would continue through the choices Sarah was about to make. The walls of the makeshift clinic shook as another mortar round exploded outside, closer than the last. Dust rained down from the ceiling as Sarah continued working on the pregnant woman who had gone into premature labor. Emily's stethoscope pressed against her chest. Sarah could hear the rapid heartbeat of both mother and unborn child, both fighting for life amid the chaos of war. "Doc, that last one was only 50 meters out," Morrison's urgent voice crackled through a radio. "They're walking the mortars toward the building. We need to move these patients now." Sarah looked around the clinic at the faces depending on her. The pregnant woman gripping her hand with desperate strength. The elderly man whose internal bleeding she was barely keeping under control. The burned child whose father stood guard beside his son's stretcher. These weren't just patients. They were Emily's legacy, the people her cousin had died protecting. "Chief, I need 5 more minutes," Sarah replied, her hands never stopping as she worked to stabilize the woman's condition. "The baby is breached, and if I don't correct the position now, we'll lose them both during transport." Through the damaged window, Sarah could see the SEAL team establishing defensive positions around the clinic. Rodriguez was setting up a machine gun nest while Johnson laid claymore mines along the most likely approach routes. These warriors who had loved Emily were now risking their own lives to protect Sarah and her patients. The pregnant woman cried out in pain as another contraction hit. Sarah could feel the baby shifting position, responding to her careful manipulations. Emily's notes on emergency obstetrics, which Sarah had studied intensively over the past weeks, guided her movements as she worked to turn the infant. "Got him," Sarah whispered as she felt the baby's head engage properly. "Okay, Mama, on the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you have." Outside, the sound of small arms fire joined the explosions as the insurgents began their ground assault. Sarah could hear Morrison coordinating the defense over the radio, his calm voice providing instructions to his team while mortar rounds continued to fall around the clinic. "Sarah, we've got enemy infantry approaching from the north," Morrison called out. "They'll be in direct assault range in 3 minutes." The pregnant woman pushed with tremendous effort, her face contorted with pain and determination. Sarah guided the infant's emergence, using techniques Emily had developed for delivering babies under combat conditions. With one final push, the baby slid into Sarah's waiting hands, a perfect little girl who immediately began crying, announcing her arrival to the world. "She's beautiful," Sarah told the exhausted mother as she cleared the infant's airway and checked her vital signs. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that worked perfectly, even amid the violence surrounding them. The miracle of birth brought tears to Sarah's eyes. This was why Emily had stayed, why she had sacrificed everything to preserve life in the face of those who sought to destroy it. "Doc, time's up," Rodriguez's voice called urgently from his position near the window. "I can see muzzle flashes approaching fast." Sarah quickly clamped and cut the umbilical cord, wrapped the newborn in a clean blanket, and placed her in her mother's arms. "What will you call her?" she asked as she prepared the woman for transport. "Emily," the woman replied in broken English, tears streaming down her face. "Her name will be Emily, for the doctor who died saving my village." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. This woman remembered Emily's sacrifice and was honoring her memory by naming her daughter after the American medic who had given everything to protect strangers. "Then little Emily and her mother are going to be just fine," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're going to get you both out of here." The first rifle shots struck the clinic wall as Sarah and her medical assistant prepared the patients for emergency evacuation. The elderly man was stabilized, but needed immediate surgery. The burned child had responded well to treatment, but required ongoing care. The new mother and her baby needed protection from the elements and continued monitoring. Morrison appeared at the clinic entrance, his face streaked with sweat and dirt from the fighting. "Doc, we've got a clear corridor to the landing zone, but it won't stay clear long. We need to move everyone now." Sarah looked around the clinic one final time, making sure no patient had been forgotten. Emily's stethoscope bounced against her chest as she helped lift the pregnant woman onto a stretcher. 3 months ago, Emily had made her final stand in this same room, giving her life to save the mother and child who had survived the clinic's destruction. Now Sarah was continuing that mission, ensuring that Emily's sacrifice would not be forgotten. The evacuation moved with military precision despite the chaos around them. Johnson and Rodriguez carried the elderly man while Sarah supported the pregnant woman's stretcher. The burned child was carried by his father, who refused to let anyone else touch his son. Morrison and the remaining team members provided covering fire as the group moved toward the helicopter landing zone. Mortar rounds continued to fall around them, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Sarah found herself thinking about Emily's final moments, wondering if her cousin had felt the same mixture of fear and determination that now coursed through her own veins. "Movement to our right," Johnson called out, pointing toward a group of insurgents who were trying to flank their position. The SEAL team responded immediately, laying down suppressive fire that forced the enemy to seek cover. Sarah continued moving toward the landing zone, her focus entirely on protecting the patients in her care. She understood now what had driven Emily to stay in the clinic despite the danger: the absolute conviction that some things were worth dying for. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as the evacuation team reached the designated pickup point. 2 Black Hawks descended through the smoke and dust, their door gunners providing additional covering fire against the insurgent forces. "Load the patients first," Morrison ordered as the helicopters touched down. Sarah helped transfer the pregnant woman and her newborn daughter into the first aircraft, making sure they were secured for the flight to the base hospital. The woman grabbed Sarah's hand as the medics prepared to close the aircraft door. "Thank you," she said in English, her eyes conveying gratitude that transcended language barriers. "Thank you for being like Emily." As the first helicopter lifted off with the most critical patients, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. She had faced the same choice that had confronted Emily 3 months earlier, and while she hadn't been forced to make the ultimate sacrifice, she had proven to herself that she possessed the same courage and commitment that had defined her cousin's character. The second helicopter arrived to extract Sarah and the remaining team members. As they climbed aboard, Morrison placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Emily would be proud of what you did today," he said, his voice barely audible above the noise of the rotors. Sarah looked back toward the village as their helicopter gained altitude. Smoke continued to rise from the fighting, but she knew that the patients they had saved would survive to see better days. The newborn girl, named Emily, would grow up knowing that American medics had risked everything to protect her family. During the flight back to base, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she had been simply another military medic doing her job competently, but without any deeper connection to her mission. Learning about Emily had changed everything, providing her with a legacy to honor and a standard of excellence to maintain. The helicopter touched down at the base medical facility, where a full surgical team was waiting to treat the patients. Sarah supervised the transfer of casualties, making sure that each person received appropriate care. The elderly man was immediately taken to surgery, where doctors would repair the internal damage caused by shrapnel. The burned child was admitted to the intensive care unit for ongoing treatment. The new mother and her baby were placed in a recovery room where they could bond safely. As Sarah completed her paperwork documenting the mission, she realized that she had found her place within the SEAL team. She was no longer trying to fill Emily's shoes or live up to her cousin's memory. She was creating her own legacy while honoring the values they had shared. Chief Morrison found Sarah in the medical supply room later that evening, where she was restocking her emergency kit for future missions. "Doc, I want to give you something," he said, holding out a small package wrapped in military-issue cloth. Sarah unwrapped the package to reveal Emily's medal for meritorious service, the decoration she had received posthumously for her actions during the clinic attack. "I can't accept this," Sarah protested. "This belongs to Emily's family." Morrison shook his head. "Emily's family is right here. You've proven that today and every day since you arrived. She would want her cousin to have this." Sarah held the medal carefully, feeling the weight of the honor it represented. The decoration wasn't just recognition for Emily's heroism. It was a symbol of the values that connected all military medics who put service before self. "There's something else," Morrison continued. "Command has approved the publication of Emily's medical manual. Your work completing her research has been extraordinary, and it's going to save lives throughout the military medical community." The news filled Sarah with pride and sadness in equal measure. Emily's innovations would continue helping medics for years to come, ensuring that her expertise would outlive her physical presence. The manual would be dedicated to Emily's memory, but it would also include Sarah's contributions and the insight she had gained from working with the SEAL team. Over the following weeks, Sarah settled into her permanent role as the team's medic. The SEALs no longer treated her as a replacement for Emily. She had earned recognition as Sarah Chun, a skilled professional who brought her own unique strengths to the unit. The comparison to Emily remained, but it had evolved from a burden into a source of mutual honor. The pregnant woman she had delivered during the village mission sent regular updates through local contacts, sharing photos of baby Emily as she grew and developed. Seeing the child thrive provided Sarah with tangible proof that her risks had been worthwhile, that the choice to stay and fight for life had created lasting good in the world. Rodriguez approached Sarah one evening as she was updating medical records. He carried a small wooden box that Sarah recognized as containing Emily's personal effects. "Doc, we've been talking as a team, and we want you to have Emily's stethoscope. Not to replace the one you have, but to add to your collection. She always said that a medic could never have too many good tools." Sarah accepted the stethoscope with profound gratitude. The instrument that had been damaged in Emily's final battle had been carefully restored, its scratches and dents serving as reminders of the courage it had witnessed. "I'll treasure this," Sarah said, "and I'll make sure it continues saving lives." As months passed, Sarah found herself becoming the heart of the SEAL team in much the same way Emily had been. She learned about each warrior's family, their fears and hopes, their dreams for life after military service. She provided not just medical care, but emotional support, serving as a confidant and counselor when the stresses of deployment became overwhelming. The empty chair that had once honored Emily's memory was eventually filled, but not forgotten. A small plaque was mounted on the chair's back, bearing Emily's name and the dates of her service. Sarah often sat in that chair during team gatherings, feeling connected to her cousin's spirit and committed to continuing her work. During a particularly difficult mission 6 months later, when the team was pinned down by enemy fire and casualties were mounting, Sarah found herself drawing strength from Emily's example. As she worked on wounded SEALs under impossible conditions, she could almost feel her cousin's presence guiding her hands and steadying her nerves. The mission ended successfully, with all wounded warriors surviving their injuries and returning to duty within weeks. That night, as the team gathered around their traditional fire pit, Morrison raised a toast to both medics who had served them. "To Emily Thompson, who taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite being afraid. And to Sarah Chun, who carries on that tradition every day." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the SEALs raised their glasses in salute. She had found her family, her purpose, and her place in honoring a legacy that would continue long after all of them had returned home. Later that evening, Sarah wrote her final letter to Emily, this one filled with gratitude rather than grief. "Dear Emily," she wrote, "I understand now why your team loved you so much. It wasn't just because you were skilled, though you were. It wasn't just because you were brave, though you were. It was because you saw each of them as a whole person worthy of love and protection. You gave them a piece of your heart, and they've given me pieces of theirs in return. I'm not trying to be you anymore. I'm trying to be the best version of myself that I can be. But I'll always carry your example with me, and I'll make sure your story is never forgotten. As Sarah sealed the letter and placed it with the other she had written, she realized that her journey of discovery was complete. She had found her cousin, her family, and herself in the dusty forward operating base where heroes were made and legends were born. The wounded had found their voice through Sarah's hands and heart, and Emily Thompson's legacy lived on through every life she saved, every tear she dried, and every moment of hope she provided to warriors far from home. The SEALs who had once stood cold and wordless in their grief had found warmth again, not as a replacement for what they had lost, but as an addition to the love they carried forward. In the end, Sarah learned that some wounds heal not by forgetting the pain, but by transforming it into something beautiful, love that transcends death, service that honors sacrifice, and hope that emerges from the darkest moments of human experience.